Hello and welcome to another session of ASM Live, coming to you from New Orleans during the 2011 General Meeting of the American Society for Microbiology. My name is Jeffrey Fox. I'm the features editor of Microbe and your host for these sessions. And before I introduce my guest, I want to remind the viewers on the web that you can ask questions by sending your questions to hashtag ASM 2011. During this session, I'll be talking with Edward Drzyk of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he's been working on asthma and finding a tie-in with an infectious bacterium. And Edward, if you would, I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and kind of summarize, give some of the highlights of your findings, and tell us who you're working with at the University of Massachusetts, and then we'll get into some more give and take.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation, Jeff. I work at the University of Massachusetts, as you mentioned, with Dr. Wilmer Webley, and we have we've been working with chlamydia, and there's been a lot of research that's being done tying microorganisms to asthma, and we actually focused on our organism and how it relates to asthma as well. We have discovered that Chlamydia pneumoniae in our recent studies is found in the lungs of asthmatic children, and we asked ourselves, what is the mechanism by which it does it, and does it actually induce the asthma? So we decided to look at the mechanism of asthma as a whole, and especially allergic asthma. We noticed that there is allergens that induce the allergic asthma, and the allergen-specific IgE that's being produced is what mediates mast cell degranulation and eventually leads to the symptoms of asthma. So we asked ourselves, is Chlamydia pneumoniae, a specific type of chlamydia, is it responsible for causing the induction of IgE antibodies that causes asthma symptoms? And if it does, what happens if we remove the chlamydia and we use an antibiotic that is commonly available to treat it, and will these people get better? So what we have found is that there is indeed IgE antibodies being produced against Chlamydia pneumoniae, and we have done a study where we detect these IgE antibodies in our patient cohort. In our study, we recruited 103 patients, where 66 of them were asthmatics. And
these are all children, right?
These are adults. This is an adult study.
Okay.
So we found that out of the 66 asthma patients in our study, 35 of them had chlamydia-specific IgE, Chlamydia pneumoniae-specific IgE. So one of the common treatments for asthma is corticosteroids. And corticosteroids reduce inflammation, but they also suppress the immune system, allowing Chlamydia pneumoniae to proliferate. So this would definitely cause some more severe asthma symptoms. Our next question then is, what if we treat patients suffering from most severe asthma we treat them with antibiotics, just simply based on their severity?
So you don't know whether they have an active infection.
So
you know they're producing IgE specific for this pathogen.
Right. So one of the things that we tested for is also whether or not they have Chlamydia pneumoniae DNA, meaning do they have the pathogen in their whole blood. And it's interesting that not all of the patients that had chlamydia-specific IgE had the chlamydia organism. And well, there are several explanations for that. It could be that the IgE being produced is either on their memory cells that is hanging around in the whole blood, or there is also on the mast cells. When IgE binds to mast cells, it could still be there, that we're detecting it. But the organism is not always there when IgE, chlamydia-specific IgE is found.
Okay, now I'm sorry I kind of diverted you. You were about to say how many of those
Right.
patients resolved their symptoms of asthma, and so we should get those numbers and a sense of how well this treatment is working.
Right. So out of our 66 asthma patients, we treated 41 based on their severity. And we actually only have the outcomes for 28 of these 41 patients. However, what we found is that 23 out of these 28 had improved asthma symptoms. So only 5 of them did not. Basically, we found that a lot of people do get better after treatment with antibiotics, with chlamydicidal antibiotics. So
this is not some sort of exotic treatment either. It's a kind of simple, short course of antibiotics that's of an antibiotic. Can you name which one it is?
Yes, we're actually using azithromycin,
Okay.
brand name Zithromex. These patients receive a 12-week dose of azithromycin, and afterwards they're reevaluated by a physician.
Oh, so it is an extended
Yes.
treatment. Okay.
Well, it's 12 weeks,
Yep. So let me ask you, one thing that strikes me as really unusual, I think, is that you're suggesting, and your findings indicate that for some reason this pathogen is inducing an immunoglobulin E response. Now, typically, IgE, as far as I know, is a response to allergens, not to pathogens. So why do you have any idea why this pathogen is inducing a response that really the body is not trying to rid itself of the pathogen as an ordinary healthy immune response would be? Do you have any idea what's going on there?
So most of the people more than half of the people that were in our study, that were asthmatics, had their asthma symptoms when they were children. So we're thinking that there is a Th2 response that's being mediated against the Chlamydia pneumoniae, as opposed to a normal Th1 response, which basically is the reason why IgE antibodies are being produced against Chlamydia pneumoniae. So Chlamydia pneumoniae is an infection that targets the lower airway, and if you treat somebody with asthma with corticosteroids, then it's just hanging out there. So, the immune response, the immune system is not able to deal with it as properly if people are receiving, if they're receiving corticosteroid treatments.
All right. So part of what's going on is that the individuals who become asthmatics, for some reason, their immune system doesn't act right in the first place, and so instead of treating a pathogen as a pathogen, it's as if it were ragweed or some other pollen to which they have anomalous reactions as part of allergy responses.
Right. Well, the key is that these people are getting infected early on in their lives. At this point, their Th1 immune system is not as well developed.
Okay.
So that is why they go into another pathway. That is why they have more IgE production.
All right. So in some ways, your findings seem difficult to square with another hypothesis that is enjoying a great deal of discussion, this hygiene hypothesis that you need to expose children to dirt and other kinds of dirt, including microorganisms, as a way of priming their immune system to steer them clear of problems such as asthma. Am I making sense? And
Yes.
does this? So you're on almost a very different track from that hypothesis, it seems.
Well, it's actually interesting that you say this because there have been a lot of study linking allergies to early exposure to microbes in their lives. So if there is a more developed Th1 immune system, then after an infection with Chlamydia pneumoniae, the immune system will be able to deal with the infection much better. So in a way, this ties together, because if these people are infected early on in their lives with Chlamydia pneumoniae, then they just will not have as strong, as good of a response. I guess the Th1 response, they will not have a proper Th1 response against it.
All right, and what makes chlamydia so special? Why are there no other, let's say, pathogens of the respiratory system that are implicated in asthma, in making asthma more fulminant or having a role to trigger asthma? Is there something peculiar about chlamydia that it can play this role?
So there have been a lot of studies actually being done with different viruses and microbes. Respiratory syncytial virus is very prominent in its tie with asthma. Mycoplasma as well. So this research has been developing more and more recently. So one of the organisms, well, we work with Chlamydia pneumoniae, so we asked ourselves, based on the findings that other groups have developed, that if there is a lower airway infection with Chlamydia pneumoniae, does it cause this asthma the same way that, for example, RSV does it? So recent studies have tied development of Ig against RSV and other organisms and tied it to airway hyperresponsiveness, which is a hallmark of asthma. So we just basically asked ourselves if the organisms that we're working with have a similar role.
All right, so there's nothing, and is there anything peculiar about this group of organisms then, including RSV, in terms of, are they all, say, indolent pathogens? They're not, or are they chronic? Is there some other property that allows you to say, well, this kind of makes a coherent picture of being implicated in asthma, which itself is a chronic condition?
One of the things that I know personally is that all of these target the lower airway. So both Chlamydia pneumoniae, RSV, parainfluenza virus that's also involved, and Mycoplasma, they all target the lower airway. So I believe the fact that they're found in the lower airway may play a role in the fact that these people are suffering with asthma.
I see.
So.
Okay. Let's go back a bit to you cited some numbers, which I'm not going to be able to recapitulate precisely, but there's a group of patients who were treated whose results you don't have yet, but you will later on, or?
Yes. So out of the 41 patients that we treated, of the 66 that were asthmatics, we still don't have data for 13 of the patients. But that is just a matter of time.
It's just a matter of time. Okay, so there's nothing peculiar. They didn't drop out for some other anomalous reasons. But these are still relatively small numbers. Are there plans to do a larger scale clinical trial? So
this is a case series study, and I would assume that it would be much better if we have larger numbers. I believe that we are looking at other ways that we can include more people into the study so that we can get better numbers, more statistically significant numbers.
And would it make sense to include not only individuals who have chlamydia infections, but some of those who are also infected or are instead infected with some of the other pathogens you mentioned just a couple of minutes ago? So you can look at them in parallel. I would think you would want to do that as a possibility. of course, you would have to treat them differently too in terms of antimicrobials.
So a very interesting finding that we had was actually that out of the asthma patients that we did treat, none of them did not have chlamydia-specific IgE, but 8 of these 9 got better, still had improved asthma symptoms. So, one of our hypotheses about why they got better, even though they don't have chlamydia-specific IgE, is that maybe the antibiotics being used is acting against another bacteria that's in the lungs, in the lower airway as well.
So they might have an IgE potentially to another bacterial pathogen
Quite possible.
that's being hit by that treatment. Yeah. Okay, that would be interesting. Now you, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that some of the patients have had extraordinary experiences and that there's some kind of website that reflects or has testimony, I don't know. I think it would be interesting if you would share some of those details with us so that if anybody wanted to look that up, they could get a flavor for how sometimes the results have been dramatic for individuals.
Yes, so there's been this one individual, the website that he made is a testimony of his life, really, and it's called asthmastory.com. This individual had asthma for most of his life. It became very severe asthma. He was spending thousands and thousands of dollars in treatment each year, and he was still not getting any better. So one of the times that he had an asthma attack, he was actually found in front of his porch and resuscitated there by the EMTs. So he started asking himself, what can I do to get better? And he found a study by Dr. David Hann from the University of Wisconsin Medical School. He's been a strong supporter of Chlamydia pneumoniae's involvement in asthma and treatment with antibiotics for severe cases. So this person went to Dr. David Hann and asked him for azithromycin antibiotic treatment. And after he received the treatment, he actually felt a lot better, and eventually his asthma symptoms disappeared. On his website, he actually talks about how he's been rock climbing, and he's been having a great life ever since he received this treatment. So you can deduce from that that chlamydia is responsible in that case for his asthma, and that antibiotics, simple antibiotics, really work.
Well, it seems that way anyway. Of course, it's a one case and it's an anecdote, but it's the kind that they're always fascinating to hear, and who knows, maybe it'll work. I'm thinking of throwing a coughing fit myself. I am an asthmatic, and it's been exacerbated by an infection, and it's all I can do to control that cough while we're doing this. Tell us a bit, you said that there's some animal studies that could help to expand this work and kind of look at it in more mechanistic detail. I know you're not an expert in that, but I thought it would be good to explore that a little bit, just to give people an idea of that not everything is being done at the clinical level.
Yes, so one of the studies that we did, actually a mouse study,
Sorry.
That's okay.
That's an example. I'm not faking it, folks. Go ahead.
So in one of our studies, we actually used a chlamydial strain, mouse pneumonitis, and we infected mice at birth, and we monitored their symptoms. And we've discovered that the mouse that were infected with chlamydia chlamydia mouse pneumonitis strain, they had a very hard time clearing the infection. So, which goes along the lines that that people who get infected with chlamydia pneumonia early on have trouble clearing the infection as well. In this study, the mice that were infected early on, they just had much harder time in their development. They were usually smaller than regular mice, and they had developed a lot of health issues, and some of them died as well.
And what about their IgE levels? Were they also producing IgE to chlamydia, or did you not measure that?
I don't know if we measured their IgE, but it would be interesting to find that out, actually.
Okay. Do we have any question? We do have a question from the back of the room here.
I'm Vincent Racaniello from Columbia University. It's worth mentioning that rhinoviruses are involved in the majority of asthma exacerbations because they most frequently cause common colds more than any viral agent. Not only that, but when you are infected at a young age, it predisposes you to having asthma. So in your studies, do you ever look for concurrent infections at the same time as your chlamydial infections, and could that modify the outcome?
We haven't actually looked at other microbes or viruses that are involved in our study with chlamydia, but I would actually assume that it would be a pretty good guess that early predisposition does play a role in chlamydia pneumoniae's ability to cause asthma symptoms.
Now, let me ask a question, because I don't know if rhinoviruses, are they they're generally upper respiratory rather than lower. So would that make a difference in terms of how this fits in with your other findings and kind of the model that that pathogen, whether it's a virus or a bacterium, has to be hitting the lower part of the respiratory tract to induce asthma or play a role triggering it in the first place?
Do you mind if I comment? We work on rhinoviruses. So.
Yeah, we figured you did.
So historically, they have been thought to be primarily upper tract pathogens. But now a large number of new genotypes of rhinoviruses have been discovered that primarily cause severe lower tract disease. So it's not clear the historical association with asthma exacerbation, whether that is involving upper or lower tract or both. These new types can't be cultured, and they've only been discovered by sequencing clinical specimens. So it's a very interesting question.
All right, so we have yet another potential culprit waiting on the sidelines to be examined. Do we have any questions from others in the room or anyone on the internet? I know the internet can't talk back, but maybe you go ahead and tweet away. Well, if not, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share on the subject and where you think it's going? It does seem like an important matter to pursue. It's somewhat preliminary in terms of proving that it's chlamydia and there are other pathogens that seem to be implicated as well. So it's a pretty complicated picture it seems. So go ahead.
Well, we know that asthma is a multifactorial disease. It has many phenotypes, and we have found an infectious phenotype. And based on our data and our findings, we have shown that there is one phenotype that can be curable with antibiotics, which is very important and played a role in the lives of people who have had improved asthma symptoms, obviously. So there is this really important finding that some types of asthma can be completely resolved.
Or at least until somebody encounters another chlamydia, happens to develop another chlamydia infection, for example. I suppose they would still be vulnerable if that's their path into asthma. If they continue to make IgE antibodies, for example, to chlamydia, they would probably get worse if they were reinfected. I mean, you may not know that, but
so in our study, we haven't done that.
Explored that.
We did have one of our patients. He is actually one of the patients that improved, and we retested him, and he had chlamydia pneumoniae DNA the first time when we tested him. The second time after his improved asthma symptoms, he no longer had chlamydia pneumonia DNA. He had recurrent symptoms later on, and he came back and he was retested one more time for chlamydia pneumonia DNA, and it was found that he does have chlamydia pneumonia DNA. So it's interesting to see that this person, he got antibiotics, he had asthma, he got antibiotics, he felt better, his asthma returned, and the pathogen returned. So, but it's only one case, so
Right.
we cannot make any conclusions from that.
Okay. Well, let me thank Edward Drzyk again for joining us. He's from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. We were talking about asthma. This concludes another session of ASM Live. We have one more to go today. Please join us later. Thanks for watching.